Recording this artist talk, and we ask that you mute yourselves. And if you select the speaker view on your top right corner under view, you'll be able to see the person speaking highlighted. If you have questions, please use the chat box feature on your Zoom. And welcome, I'm not sure why I'm frozen here on my view. But welcome everyone. And Kong and Shanna, let's begin. Once you started this recording, I kind of froze.
Oh, I see. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for your for attending. We'll
Great.
just jump right into it since we have a lot to talk about. So I'll hand it over to Shayna.
Oh, okay, great. Well, hi everybody. And it's true, we do have a lot to talk about. So I'm going to keep my housekeeping up front real minimal, but just to let everybody, especially the artists, know, I didn't want to do a thing where we kind of go around and everyone answers the same question. And I didn't want to. And one thing that I love the most about group show dynamics is when artists start having conversations with each other. And I think that in some ways is the most interesting for audiences as well. So I'm going to kick things off actually with you, Kong, because you, of course, are as the cornerstone of this, are not only the curator, but an artist whose work is in the exhibition. And as a general matter, what I'll be wanting to discuss with between and among all of the artists, of course, is how they view their relationship to the brief of the exhibition and this idea that, the sort of phenomenology of human existence can be broken down into different facets and regarding our relationship to ourselves, to each other, to the planet, to the future, and all of the things that have been so eloquently laid out in terms of the curatorial armature of the show. And of course, it being a very eclectic group show in terms of mediums and materials, there are this really beautiful there is a really beautiful proliferation of relationships to the topic at hand, and really surprising and really thoughtful. And I feel like I know you've been working on this show for months, years, and yet, as so often happens with powerful ideas like this, the timing of it opening during a time when we are all, whether we like it or not, re-examining our personal relationships to ourselves, to each other, to the planet, to technology, to nature, to the future. That's what we're all doing right now. It's almost like you made the show the week before it opened because it feels so current to me. And I feel like that's really exciting. And so as we go through speaking with everyone, and I really want to make sure everyone gets at least one chance, to weigh in on these topics. That's kind of the framework of what I'll be, prodding or prompting people to speak about. So, of course, I want to start with you. And I'm personally very curious about the sort of cart and horse of your work and the ideas for the curatorial project. In other words, does this idea grow out of ideas that you are already kicking around in the studio in your work? Or was it sort of like, its own idea that you had and you realized that some of your work, fit perfectly into it? Like how do you see that relationship?
Yes. Yeah. So it is very related to my own work as well as my graduate studies. So from my dissertation project, I'm investigating the ground of being. That's the source from which particular entities emerge. So it's not about particular existence. It's about a pervasive universal field from which particular entities emerge. So it includes human nature, but I guess a more expanded range of investigation as well. And my artwork examines human nature as well as the nature of being in general. So it's both a investigation of particularity as well as more of a general approach to being as such.
And as far as the imagery, right, and the visual idioms that you use in your work, to me, what I love about it is what feels like a sort of past and future kind of simultaneity, right? There's this really beautiful, ritualistic, almost meditative kind of, symmetrical, fundamental shapes. And yet there's also a slight sort of like retrofuturist, like H.G. Wells spacecraft kind of, romantic robotics kind of energy to it, to me. And I feel like I'm very charmed by how those two things coexist. So would you say that is accurate?
Yes, there is an aspect that includes time and space, gradual temporal development, evolutionary process, but there's a more essential part. I call it a spontaneous leap into another mode of being, knowing, and time. That is not limited to temporal sequence. So in that mode of being, there's no dichotomy between knower and known. And I wouldn't say that it's timeless, rather it's more of some kind of eternity, or you can also say it's a fullness of time. So it's both eternity, which includes, space and time.
I like that. And the concept of simultaneity, which I think about a lot, both in terms of science fiction, but also just in terms of like what the internet is, right? It's kind of like everything all at once quality to modern life that I really feel like has to do with the internet. And yet also these sort of much more ancient precepts of, how linear time is an illusion, and the timeless realm of the interior world, and those sorts of things that they feel like they should be oppositional, but in fact, in a union such as you achieve in your work, it actually makes a lot of sense as well. And I find that very interesting. It's a kind of paradox. And to me, I feel like just organically, this is Sean's here, right? Sean Noyes, there you are.
Hey.
I feel like while we were talking, I was already thinking about you, because I know that a lot of those same issues are at play in your work, having to do with the past and the future, and art objects as sites of certain kinds of rituals and certain kinds of energy nodes. And I'm wondering if you could speak about that a little bit, please.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of my work is kind of centered around this idea of like learning from our past, but also exploring our future. And I'm really interested in this idea of like these commonalities that disparate cultures from around the world have explored the idea of like metaphysics and ritual. There's a really interesting book or zine out now. It's called Witches, Pagans, and Cultural Appropriation. I don't know if any of you guys have heard about this. It's by this author, M. Paradise. And in the zine, she talks about these like commonalities between various cultures from around the world, which include like trance, altered states, singing, sex. We're all sort of interested in that, dancing, adornment, and in my work, I'm interested in these ideas where all these things sort of intersect, and we can kind of relate to them on a very sort of human level. And I'm bringing this back to this show in particular because we are
I petered out. I just got freaked out when I get hurt.
I know.
I feel like I'm beyond my capability.
I'm gonna find out who that is. Seek and destroy. Who is that?
There you
Who
go.
are you? I see you.
So anyway, yeah, my work. So in this title here, Persephone Samhain, explores these like ancient Greco-Roman ideas, but also integrates them with these like Celtic kind of druidic traditions. And I like exploring these like sort of origin stories and getting to the sort of root of Western culture and these traditions that we've sort of handed down and passed down throughout the generations that kind of seep in through the lexicon, or the zeitgeist, and whether we're aware of them or not, these things are very much a part of our existence. So these things are very sort of interesting to me in my work.
Yeah, I mean, I love them, and the installation of them is beautiful. And I'm thank you for that. And that I'm playing a sort of free association game with myself, depending on the answers that I get from folks of who I want to go to next. And that made me want to talk to Habib. You there, buddy? Where are you? I saw you before. There you are. Unmute yourself. Because to me, I love the way that you speak about and I don't even want to say objects right away in your images, because the way you speak about them that I love has to do with them as both being objects and places, and also simply abstract paintings, kind of all simultaneously, these different ways of existing all at the same time, in paint on canvas, right? No futurism. And yet a lot of the same things that both Kong and Sean have spoken about in terms of something being more than one thing at once. And I wonder if you could elaborate on that a little bit in terms of these paintings here.
Well, thank you for having me. Hello, everyone. I don't know, I read the questions that Kang had proposed. I like the way you see my paintings in relation to, I guess, painting an object. But one thing that came to mind when I was reading those questions and all these intents was a quote by John Cage, where he says, you go into the studio and you take everyone in there with you. Gradually, they leave and you're by yourself. And if you're lucky, you leave as well. So this idea of being able to achieve something beyond yourself is, of course, I imagine, part of every artist's practice. I have a hard time believing that it isn't, even though some approach it with a lot of concepts. But all that aside, you end up just being with the work. And I don't know if you've noticed my newest work, it's a little different from the paintings that are in this show. Sculpture has returned after about 10 years. So the images have jumped out of the paintings. I don't know where these images come from. I've had conversations with Jeffrey Valens and others who try to dissect them and figure out what they mean. And they're conjured images. And I, of course, like many, when I go into the studio, I try to get to this space that John Cage talks about, where everybody leaves, even the artist. And so I play the guitar. I use whatever method that I can in order to get to this trance space. And you know, I look at the paintings and often I think that they paint themselves. They tell me what to do, and I try to do my best to follow what they ask for. I don't know if
I
all
like
this
that a
answers
lot. I
your
mean,
question anyway.
well, I think that they do. I mean, what I love about these in particular is that way in which they kind of hover between, you know, some look more like objects, some have a more landscape quality. None of them read as entirely non-figurative or non-objective, and yet they're elusive, and they seem to have a little bit of a consciousness or a personality. And so what you just said makes a lot of sense in terms of like, you know, they imagine themselves into being and you're just kind of there. That's kind of what it feels like, right? It's almost like that kind of, you know, Blade Runner, the thing about, you know, do androids dream of electric sheep, right? It's like, what is the painting's idea of itself, you know?
True.
And yet they're, you know, they have the central image and legible pictorial space and all of these sort of like conventional aspects of a painting. And that's a very strange flicker, which I personally really enjoy in when you do in these series. I've seen more than just these in person over the years. And I feel like, you know, it's like you notice your brain trying to sort it out. Right? You watch yourself trying to decide if that's a horizon line or not.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember, but prior to this body of work, I made those images that were based on the remains of a performance, the dome in a state of disarray, and those were, you know, very carefully rendered, and those definitely were, you know, based on an image, and there was this conceptual motivation behind them, and maybe they followed the kind of thinking that John's was offering us, and that you arrive at a subject matter and you do one thing to it and then another thing, you know, so you don't have to worry about subject matter. Well, after that body of work was played out, and I tried to move away from that image, so I refer to these images as kind of weird portrayals or self-portrayals, and, you know, sort of explorations of oneself, and almost going back to the cave, you know, instead of trying to assert some, you know, defined conceptual idea, really going back to being as primitive as I could be, you know, and forgetting, remembering and forgetting was really a strategy on how to paint. I can remember how to paint and then forget it when you go to paint. You know, these aren't new ideas, but certainly they've been around for a very long time. And I guess I've been around for a long time.
So have we all, and hopefully longer.
No, so,
yeah. Thank you for that. I love what you said. And, you know, this idea, I want to talk to Gary Brewer next, because, hi, Gary, because this idea that Habib brought up, one of the several really beautiful ideas, has to do with this idea of like the painting creating itself, and that there is, you know, it's like there's the artist directing it, and then there's an internal logic to the work. There's a reference-ish to the world of nature, but ultimately it's you know, distancing itself from that at the same time. And I feel like this would be a great opportunity for you to speak about how you view your place on that continuum between representation and abstraction, and how your work builds itself in that sense.
Is that to me, Shana?
Yes.
Hello there. Well, my work, you know, my work has evolved in a very organic fashion, and literally, in a sense, kind of self-discovery. Like Like, I think that when I began this work many years ago, 20 plus years ago, you know, I had been an abstract painter for years and was always searching for some kind of sublime universal language and abstraction. And it really never was a fit, even though I admired and loved so many of the painters whose work I sort of referenced in my development. There just came a point when I couldn't go any further. So I have always been deeply, you know, I've spent my entire adult life and youth surfing and hiking and backpacking and, you know, have really immersed myself in nature and have had a deep connection to nature. And I lived in Santa Cruz and barns and chicken coops in the mountains and north coast of Santa Cruz for years. So nature's always been a deep part of me. So the transition from abstraction to nature initially started with sort of thinking more like a Terry Winters kind of tweener space. And then what happened was, you know, one of the things I saw that as an abstract painter, I really had really high crafted surfaces. But then when I went into using nature, I really found that just resolving that thing was what I needed. This craft element was a deep need, you know, really. I mean, it doesn't have to do with some moral or ethical notion of craft, of being above non-craft. Like I love Pollock, I love, you know, Eve Klein, I love any number of people who don't necessarily use craft in a traditional sense of what craft means. But for me, it was very important. It added something to my experience of creation. So, and it was the very unusual things like lichen is a very unusual abstract form. And so that space between abstraction and figuration naturally unfolded. And as I proceed now with many years into this, for instance, my backgrounds for this painting we're looking at here, Birth of the World, that's based on NASA imaging of dark matter, which is mysterious in the sense that we can't even really perceive it. The way they mapped it was through the bending of light, the distortion of light from gravitational, from the gravity of dark matter, theoretically, they believe. So, but it was a perfect metaphoric vehicle that functions both in a purely abstract sense, but represents something that's utterly mysterious. And so I think for me, that question as to the space between figuration representing something and abstraction, I found this really exquisite space to inhabit where I can depict things, but they're things that, like even when I'm painting like a piece of gold, man, sometimes I'm in there, it's like, dude, can't you like paint a pear or an apple or something that people instantly recognize and know what the hell you're describing? Because you get into these complex forms that, you know, that take a lot of tweaking to get them to actually read because people don't know what the hell they're looking at. And so I get to play with this interesting thing where I'm drawn to forms that suggest to me the forces in nature that beget life and consciousness and the complexity of our language speaking now through this device, all of these things that have unfolded through human consciousness and time and the creation of language and systems of organization that really originate on a deep level from life itself, single-celled organisms splitting. So I try to embrace this large philosophical universe through my paintings. And that space between something that one may recognize, oh, that's an orchid or that's an anemone, and something that they may not recognize, like natural formations of gold or lichens or dark matter. And then even the way that I deal with scale and enlarging something so much, even an orchid, surprisingly to me, a lot of people don't know what the hell it is. They think I invented it. Like, what is that? You know, how'd you come up with that? And I was like, well, you can grow them. So anyway, I don't know if that exactly answers what you're asking, but there you have it.
No, I think it does. Thank you. And I love a couple things you said. Most especially, I love this idea that you're obsessed with precision, even when it comes to something that's totally mysterious and unrecognizable, right? It's like you could be inventing it because most of us won't know. But I love that you're still attached to this sort of like cellular accuracy.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, I remember there was a moment when I started, I grew up on Disney and B-grade science fiction and, all those lovely, wonderful things, and so when I first started, there was more of a stylistic flourish towards kind of almost a Fantasia-like, Disney-like, marriage with Eve Tungy or something, this sort of strange tweener space. But the more I went, I realized, man, these things are so mind-blowingly deep in their design that it's like endless. If you
Right.
get a deeper if you do an electron scanning micrograph of something, then you get yet another whole layer of like unbelievable design. So I've grown attached to my sources, but it's
Yeah.
so satisfying because when I'm painting them, they're like abstractions. So I get a twofer.
I love that so much. Thank you. And actually, I want to talk to Anne Fong next because I feel that there's going to be a little bit of resonance with some of what Gary just said in terms of some of that same kind of interaction between sort of like the human body existing in the planet, the forces that surround us, the primordial, the abstract, the elemental, and yet also the very specific imagery in cases of work like this, actual objects. And so there's this really amazing flicker between the sort of primordial abstraction and the specificity of experience that I feel like goes into these works that still nevertheless live in kind of a landscape or a planetary place. And Anne, I wonder if you wouldn't mind just speaking about how all of that intersects for you in your work.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this exhibition, Ken. I think I look at my work that's slightly different than Gary. Gary had a pretty good childhood memory, but I grew up in Vietnam. It's a big Vietnam War during that time. So we talk about travel, moving from one place to the other place. And then after the Vietnam War was over, I even like escaped from the communists and then stay in Malaysia. And then after that, I stayed in the Philippines and then come to America. So to me, the link between that is not just human and human, but the air, the atmosphere, the environment, the nature, the tree, the flower, all those things bond me together to look at the whole thing. So the human is not the big ego in the earth to me. We're just a little tiny thing on the whole earth, but we look at us so big. That's why we trust everywhere. Because we don't care. That's the thing. So a lot of time, not everybody do that. It just need a small amount of people on earth to have that kind of thinking. And then we will damage the whole earth and then the next generation have to suffer. So I'm using that kind of feeling with nature, but kind of real material thing. The trash, the grocery bag, the paper bag, and all the plastic flower and the old cell phone and all those. And I put in my work because I love the simple life. But living in the 21st century, you cannot just live in a simple life. Without a cell phone, you cannot talk. You can even have a Zoom link today. That's how I look at it. So how can we balance between the technology and the essential thing that we need that to make a good life? So I look at that and I look at all the trust and I just bring out a statement, but I don't have the answer. The answer comes from many people. Even our leader today deny that answer, that deny all those green air, the fresh air for everybody. So I think I just bring out the awareness, how we see the earth, how we damage it by all the real object that still click onto my painting. And to do that, I use acrylic because acrylic is plastic. It allows me to put a lot of real object onto my painting, like this one showing right now. The wrinkled surface, they are the grocery bag. I use all those found objects and I put them together to show, yeah, this is how we live. That's what we have at home in the 21st century. So all those found objects is not new to anybody. We use it so many. Just how can we reduce it? But so people look at my work, say, if it's trash, why you make it so beautiful? I say, well, maybe I use a pretty color to attract the viewer to look at it, to see the ugly side. So this is how I present it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. That really makes a lot of sense. I appreciate that perspective a lot. And I think, yeah, I agree with you. I appreciate always a strategy of sort of like luring someone in with beauty and then smacking them in the head with the message when it's too late. That's a favorite strategy of mine in message-based art, definitely. And I really love what you said too about like, hey, you know, for you, not necessary to depict, but to incorporate the physicality of your subjects into the work itself. And in a way that made me think about Virginia. Hi, Virginia. Because in the work in this show, there is a very similar dynamic, except it's going on with elements found in the natural world. Nevertheless, objects and materials that maybe discarded is not the right word, but certainly like disused, right? Leaves that have already, you know, died, you know, twigs and sticks and other things, as well as incorporating some of the elements from the industrial world where they're inhabiting. And so Virginia, if you maybe would talk a little bit about, you know, how you feel like your relationship as a human to the world is expressed in the way that these pieces were made.
Sure. Thank you, Shana and Kong and everyone to be here today to participate in this conversation. Sure. So let's see. My undergraduate background, I majored in philosophy. So I think that this work and the inquiry that I have moved through over the years has been kind of based on my understanding of philosophical inquiry. And I've always loved the landscape. I've always focused on that in my work. And I would say from a philosophical point of view, the way I see it, and I think that it is true, that landscape really as it is at the heart of all inquiry. It's the basis for all study. And for me, I asked myself in terms of art making, how does an artist approach that in their work? How do I materialize what my understanding of the world is through the space around me? And that's what's brought me to this work, in that I've always admired the landscape painting tradition. And in my understanding of our place in the world, the heart of it is the idea of form. We are form, we live within form. So for me, these works all came about as paintings. They are, they're not actual found materials. I've made these all from acrylic paint. So I work with the drying time of the paint to form the leaves and the vines and the other materials you see in the panels. And for me, I felt that bringing the form into the landscape painting tradition, which is goes back to our understanding of what the landscape is and what does it mean to be here and to be alive, comes from. So it was important for me to add that element to the landscape painting tradition in terms of the use of only acrylic paint. So
That's
there's
so interesting. I'm sorry. I mean, well, look, take it as a compliment that I was sure that at least some of those materials were scavenged from nature. I was completely sure of that. So, you know, well done. But I also am very intrigued by the idea that you recreated rather than depicted, right? I find that to be just like this like semiotic, you know, chef's kiss moment of like, I could have, but instead I recreated, right?
Yes. Yes.
That's a really wonderful thing. And I know exactly what you mean, because it's a different quality of attention to draw a perfect rendering of a branch, but to actually get your hands in there and have to kind of create one is a whole other level of engagement with the original material.
Yes, and in some of the works, the piece that's on the wall, the vines and the leaves, before they're made into paintings, I incorporate them or I implant them into the landscape so that they come 360. The paint becomes the landscape itself. And for me, that was another important element of this, that landscape painting, it becomes the landscape and it's united with its source of inspiration. So from creating these interventions, as I call them, using the paint and planting it into nature, I retrieve them all and I don't leave anything into the environment. And then from there, they've become the paintings that you see in the show.
Beautiful. Wow. I mean, I love that. I feel like, you know, the engagement of human with nature through the idiom of art making could not be more clearly articulated than in that process. It's really fantastic, especially in the context of today. And going from like the very analog to the very digital, we just had a previous conversation about the continuum of augmented, virtual, and mixed reality and what all that is. And that's a whole other rabbit hole for another day. But Snezana Petrovic, of course, the work, we've had all these conversations, and you guys weren't there, but we did a quick group thing earlier today, and she and I spoke a little bit about, you know, transferring certain kinds of experience from the analog to the digital realm. So I want to have her come on next, but I actually don't want to worry too hard about the technology. What has me thinking of her after speaking with Virginia has to do with what she has to say about the relationship between the individual human and the sort of ecology of the planet as one of stewardship and responsibility, as well as, you know, the dimensions of the personal and shared direct kind of experience with nature, the ways in which those things are mediated by society and technology. But I'm really inspired to keep the conversation going with you, following on Virginia, and to give you the chance to speak a little bit about the message of connectivity that's going on in your work, which in and of itself is often about the lack of connectivity. So please take the stage. Are you unmuted? Now you're allowed to unmute yourself.
Okay. Hello.
There you are.
Thank you, Shana, for this introduction. Yeah, there are so many layers that we discussed today, and we started a really amazing panel with all this interesting ideas that were really contributed to Kang and his thoughts or instigated the dialogue within ourselves on our place within the world, within the nature, within the other. And in case of the piece that I actually created for this show, as all of us, I was binded with the space and locked down, and I applied the same idea in recording the performance that was an offer to the nature, an offer to the humanity, an offer for a better life that we hope for. I created this character, the mother, that truly does not have a gender. It's an ideal person from the future, talking about science fiction, who cares about the humanity and the nature, and therefore is organizing smaller groups of gardeners that are guarding their environment and taking care of it. So I'll just use a reference to Aldo Leopold or the deep ecology when he's saying we abuse land because we regard it as a commodity that belongs to us. And not paraphrasing, the moment that we start thinking about nature as a community, we are going to start loving it and having compassion for it. So my whole performance piece that I did was a ritual based, and it was intended to raise the level of compassion with the suffering that I exposed myself to, meaning I was not able to see well, I was not able to hear, I was not able to touch, to feel the weight of the salt that I was working with. I was not able to breathe. The sound of the performance is actually my breathing and sometimes grasping for the breath. And not knowing what I was doing until I saw the recording with 5 cameras on the act or activity that I was creating as my way of praying or creating ritual for all of us, for betterment for all of us. And it's an interesting dichotomy of using the technology and really trying to get all the senses out of the way and working on the very subtle level. So using technology in a way that's beneficial to understand what is going in the reality that I was not able to perceive. What was even more interesting was that this piece that was intended to connect to the nature in some ways, because it's ending with the opening of the underwater world with manta ray that I was able to record in Hawaii at night. And it was like a miracle because manta ray literally show up underneath me like 2 inches away and started doing these flips. And I wanted to finish this piece with this video in the background of my true experience, hoping that the nature is smarter than us. What was really interesting that at some presentations, I got very strange, aggressive responses to my hopes for our consciousness and awareness that we can bring into the healing and caring about the nature and each other. The people were very aggressive and telling me that they don't want to hear me lecturing to them. And the whole idea here was not really to lecture, but just to raise an awareness and to say, hey, we are all in this space at the same time experiencing, it is very short life, this unbelievable experience of sharing, actually. And then I realized, I'll just conclude with a Copra's quote, who is one of the deep ecologists, founder, and still a very active writer and physicist. He said, in a time of universal lies, deceit, the telling the truth is a revolutionary act. So in some ways, hoping to do something that's really an offering to the nature and humanity became a revolutionary act in the eyes of others, but just because we live at the time that is very treacherous, I'd say. And you can see the sequence here where actually the South Modala turned into this almost like shape of manta ray, which is complete accident, and disappeared. Well, in my case, the South comes back, so giving us another chance for reconciliation with ourselves and the nature. So I hope I answered.
Definitely. I love that. And I also love that, and this will segue because I want to talk with Ibuki next, because I'm very interested in, and to be honest, a little bit freaked out by your willingness to put your body like in the way of that, right? To become the site of those experiences. And this is like the 4th time I've heard you talk about what you went through with the sensory deprivation. And it scares me every single time. And I just find myself thinking like, what? In the set, but of course, obviously, using one's own body and an interaction with the most analog thing in the world, your human body, with technology in order to create these very personal and very shared messages. And I already see you nodding, so you know exactly what I want you to talk about, Ibuki. And it's, so, by the way, I'm a huge fan. It's really nice to actually meet you.
Yes, thank you so much.
I'm so glad you could be here. And anyway, that obviously, you know why I'm thinking of you in this moment. So please share yourself with the people.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much for such amazing opportunity, Ken and Noriko. It's a pleasure meeting you, Shana. So my work is the encounter of each facet through the metaphysical body. I use the dance, Butsu dance, so form, which is one of the languages for constructing my work. So Butsu dance was created by Tatsumi Hijikata and Kazuo Ono after World War II in Japan. So Butsu dance represents a shift from the conscious to the subconscious, and each movement, even when it is choreographed, comes from within and must be authentic. I reconfirm the concept of human equal body through encounters with each human form, dialogue in the physical language, and the process of presenting the body symbolizing the various human forms. So regarding metahuman, I made it with the interpretation of a ghostly body. The body has a conceptual meaning and expresses the social from surrounding us, the ideals that the human beings should aim for the future, and the society that will be carried by machines that will come in the near future with a metaphysical body. I made 5 different facets on this performance. The first one was metahuman, as I said, focused about the conscious to the subconscious. So the second one in this chapter, that this is intrahuman, I consider the social morphology. The chains wrapped around the body are the brain and the society itself and are deeply intertwined. The suit jacket represents a capitalist society, such as the wealth and the curse that it builds up. So phase 3, so this talks about transhuman. So this chapter was created with the message of anti-war. Wars in the name of country and country justice bring only suffering and fear to the people. Mushrooms in vessels are the nuclear bombs, and I argue that humans will not be free from suffering unless these nuclears are thrown away. Phase 4, it's post-human. So this chapter represents a more modern future, a cyborg body. So talking about humans becoming cyborgs or real cyborgs become humans. So the birth of human being who jumps over ethics is our hope and threat. So the last facet contains the concept of intrahuman and suprahuman beings. So that concludes with the answer of returning to the origin of the human body. Yes, here it is composed of the contrast between outdoor nature, the body, and the object, the concept of the body. So the umbilical cord connected to the stone is a guide that our human beings are inseparable from nature, and that what remains to us in the end is the body itself. We are living in a modern society where the time fluctuates. Especially this corona situation, the internet took over everything. So all human relationships are now concentrated from seclusion to the virtual world through the internet. So people's thoughts, remarks, and lives appear in our vision, which forms into photos, movies, letters, becomes a huge timeline. Since I started the quarantine, I felt misgivings about the oblivion of regular relationships with people and the oblivion of the physical body. So I reconsidered about the body again, and I felt that the technological singularity is almost here. So the last phase contains a concept of intrahuman and suprahuman beings, and concludes with the answer of returning to the origin of the final body. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. That was really beautiful. I mean, yeah. My dad is a futurist, and we have this argument all the time about whether it's the body or the mind that defines a being, and it's like, yeah. So I'm really captivated by that, and it's a beautiful cornerstone for the exhibition. And your image, your thoughts, and your imagery both make me want to talk to Colin next. He's here, right? Show me some Colin. Because I feel like even though we're looking at painting, right? So in the physicality of the work itself, we're dealing with painting, surrealist, you could argue, but I feel like the very specific subject matter that goes on in these beautiful surrealist paintings has a lot to say, just like Ibuki did, about this idea of like, what is the part that makes you human? What is the cyborg? What is our current balance between the body and the idea of the body? Where is all this going? Is progress necessarily good? These are the kinds of questions that come to my mind when I'm looking at Colin, at your work, and especially in the context of that. So even though, anyway, and there's also a really charming relationship to what you might consider technology in a sort of retro sense. And so I would like to go to you next. If you're here.
Dana, I think Colin may not be here.
Oh, well, all right, that's fine. That's what I would have said about Colin's work. No, but in all seriousness, I'll just 90 seconds then. No worries, because if people have schedules and we're gonna go, twice as long as we said and everything. But the idea that there is, you look at this and you think about machines, you think about, mannequins and body parts, and you think about robots and building, functionality and absurdism, and you think about the caretaking of, the empathetic painting style, and yet they're actually quite dystopian if you were to imagine these images, being animated in front of you, whether it's a being or a machine. And so I really like all of those interplays, and I think it has, almost like a low key, like 15% Terry Gilliam kind of take on dystopia a little bit, right? You guys see that. So that's what I would have spoken to Colin about, and their beautiful work. But instead, we will go to Doug Harvey, everybody's favorite person, and also artist and writer and curator. And Doug, I love this work because I, again, was very engaged with the idea of, that it had a like the residue of a performance just in the way that it was made. You kind of like photogrammed yourself with all of these obsolete Lectraset type lettering technologies. But what I didn't realize until I walked into the room is that the QR codes that are collaged within the image actually do open websites. They work.
Oh.
And they take you to all these Tim Hawkinson pieces, right? Which is hilarious and random, which, is on brand. But I wonder if you wouldn't mind just like continuing this theme, extrapolating this idea of like, where does the physical body fit into an internet-based world of flatness, black and white text, and images if we're lucky? And here's you trying to exist in your physical body in that universe. And that to me is what this piece reminded me of. But I would love to hear about your experience of putting it together as well.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. Hi, everybody. I just had to bring Stella outside. So yeah, there's a lot of kind of both personal and I guess you'd say semiotic to archetypal kind of connotations to what I was doing with this piece. But basically, I was kind of using Kang's sort of multi-facet model as a way of sort of restating something that's a recurring theme in my work going back for decades, which is sort of my skepticism about language, verbal, but particularly written language, and its relationship to defining reality and our experience, and as you pointed out, specifically to our bodies. I was very I felt immediately connected with what Habib was saying about getting back to cave paintings, because more and more I've been sort of thinking about art making as this fundamental human activity that stretches, way back before language, or written language anyway, and before certainly before civilization and agriculture by many tens of thousands of years, and sort of identifying with that model of art making and seeing it extending into the future when all of these sort of rickety and inadequate sort of verbal narrative models of what's reality have been overcome or rendered obsolete. I don't know. So in a way, it's not quite as negative as that makes it sound, but basically it's kind of about pushing all the sort of narrative sort of abstracted intellectual content out of the sort of definition of what is me and what isn't me, and leaving this sort of empty space to represent a way forward.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. I mean, there's two ways to look at emptiness, right? It could be the lack of something or the complete presence of every possibility, right? And it's sort of like your choice. Whether emptiness is, like you said, it's not necessarily as negative as it sounded in the beginning. It's like emptiness is a place where you can choose with what to fill it with going forward. And to me, I feel like the vision of the negative space of where your body was, literally holding space amid all of this cacophony, I find very poignant, as well as a little bit witty. And the idea of rewarding the curious with the QR code to the work of someone who arguably has similar ideas about what humanity's place is in the world anymore, was very hilarious. If you're an art nerd, it's the best joke of the year. So
Thank you. I didn't think anyone would try them out, but
oh no, I was like, what is that? Yuriko was there. She'll tell you. I freaked out when I realized that they were functional. I couldn't believe it. I was like, that's the best thing I've ever. I was so happy that you didn't say anything, because the reward was so solid. And of course, there's also this incredible irony that no other way than technological mediation was that content accessible to me. Right? So another just flip of it right at the end again, which I really enjoyed. Yeah. Thank you, Doug Harvey. I want to go to China. Adams, are you still here? I hope, China, because I know I'm cheating because I've seen these pieces before. And I know that there is a really, really interesting dimension to these drawings of rocks that is the dimension of time and time passing as they're being made. And so, you know, we're looking at rocks that we all know were formed over millennia, but we're also marking the time of your body in front of these rocks in our short-term present and other things like that going on besides in the choices and the way that these works are made. And I'm wondering if you would please just, you know, talk about that a little bit and what that means to you.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I think, you know, it's interesting, like when you look at any sort of heroic landscape, when you're out sort of, you know, in the field, if you will, there's like a couple interesting things that happen, I think both with time and then dimensionally too, right? There's this weird thing where if you're at enough of a distance, it turns into kind of flat graphic space. And then it shifts into a more sort of voluminous 3D kind of space. So there's this kind of weird like toggling that happens in nature. And then I think, of course, with time too, I mean, they speak in the most literal way to sort of an expansion of time, you know, well, you know, backward and forward. So there's, even though there's this kind of incredible stillness and stoicism about them, there's this strange kind of energetic toggling around them that even is kind of in a controlled perception, like how you think about it. So yeah, I think that you absolutely touched on it. Like part of, you know, what I'm doing in them with the studio, a couple things. Obviously, I'm flattening them significantly and making them all about this very sort of flat space. And then, you know, they're a little hard to see, frankly. There's a lot of detail. For example, the white space is tiny little pencil dots, but a lot of what I'm examining too is about that play of time. So like what it means to sit with something and prolong the process out as much as possible. So, you know, it becomes about this sort of, yeah, the elongation of time. I hesitate to use the word meditation because I really don't think of it as a meditation per se, as much as
way more obsessive compulsive than meditative in my mind.
Yeah, and you know, it's also like if I go back a bit, a lot of what these drawings were about in my mind was also this notion of how could I extend materials to their absolute sort of utmost. So like with just a simple sheet of paper, how could I make it as dense as possible? So yeah, I think that's really kind of what they're about. I think you know, obviously scale, man in relation, like in the context of the whole show, I think I'm also just really interested in how landscape frames humans in a very apropos way, and yet we tend to lose track of it. But the, you know, again, like going back to the notion of heroic spaces, I'm intrigued by how that sort of you know, changes our perspective. And I don't just mean in a kind of existential way, but I mean just physically, spatially. I think sound shifts. There's a lot of kind of radical stuff that happens in terms of structure. So I think that's kind of it, you know.
No, that's beautiful. You know, because people they talk about going to, for example, being in nature, but you don't always hear about people going out to nature in order to pay radical attention to it. Right. So to me, that I find very unique is that, you know, it's not just the kind of like, Oh yeah, I went and sat among amazing ancient rocks, and that gave me a perspective on my place in the cosmos, which is already a very deep, obviously archetypal experience, as you were talking about heroic spaces. But the idea to like really choose that level of engagement with the being there and to record that in the work, I think is another level of that relationship that I find really compelling. So yeah, definitely. Oh my God, it's good to see you too. Thank you.
Thank you.
I remember, and this is just an aside, and then we have 2 more artists, that like 2 years ago, you were like, I'm gonna do this show in 2021, and I know it seems really far away, but do you maybe wanna work on it? And I was like, yeah, whatever, girl, that's like the future. And I just wanna say that 2021 is 6 weeks from now, so hello. But I so call me. But so yeah, but it was really, so I've been thinking about this series for years, quite literally, appropriately perhaps. And it was really wonderful to see them again because unknowable to you, they would be shown in this exhibition when we've all developed a very different relationship to the passing of time and our level of attention to our surroundings. And I find a whole new life for this series for me with the experience of this year. So I was thrilled to see them included in the show. Thank you. Adrian, I cannot wait to talk to you about basically every single thing that we've talked to everybody else about all day. To me, I look at this incredible work and I see elements of pattern and landscape, obviously the figure, there's collage, there is experimentation with an incredibly kaleidoscopic array of found and unconventional materials. There is narrative and ritual and symbolism. There's collapsed timelines. I mean, there's everything. Everything we've talked about today, except unless I'm missing it, like, is there video in them? That might be it, right?
No video.
And I am just so excited to hear from you about where I feel like each one of these paintings is like a whole self-contained universe. And I am just dying to hear from you about what all goes into the kind of world building that I feel like goes on in this incredible work.
Well, I think that's a good way to put it, about it being a self-contained universe. The work is personal, but at the same time, it crosses all those things that you talked about. I deal with time in terms of creating access for myself in some ways and for the viewer, creating access to the past, the present, and the future. And then also dealing with the materiality of it all. You know, I'm a mixed media artist, and
to say the least, by the way.
Yeah.
Like, mixed media doesn't cover it. I don't know if all of you, like, here's a case where, just as an aside, like, read the materials list, you know, when you get a chance in Adrian's work. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just got so excited because it was like, baobab seeds, talk to me. What is
well, then too, a lot of my work is grounded in African spirituality and pre-colonial African culture. And as far as those seeds that you just mentioned, I actually brought those back from the continent. And so I do put those in my work. Raffia is another material that I use that also, for me, it evokes, you know, indigenous culture and value and the aesthetic. And so I use raffia a lot. In the piece that we're looking at now, I call it material duality number 1. And that was because I'm a maker. So I have this compulsion to work with materials. That's part of my practice and my interest in being an artist, or my drive in being an artist, is just working with materials. It's the materiality of things, taking something and making it into something else. And then there's the really the metaphysical aspect of it that comes into play. And in this particular piece, it really references Dogon culture. And that whole cosmogony, their philosophy and beliefs about, you know, the beginning of the world. And so those stories make their way into the work through various symbols. And then that cross, you know, that also transcends with the Middle Passage. I do, when you just said something about, you know, obsessive compulsive, and I was like, well, yeah, this kind of sounds like me. Because if you see the work up close, there's just there's a lot of, I won't call it stippling because I'm not really using a pencil, but there, you know, it's stippled paint. So there are a lot of dots. And some of the other work, there are a lot of marks, and each one of those marks, when I really get into making it, the work, they represent, you know, millions of people who have endured the Middle Passage, or succumbed to the Middle Passage, or, you know, or sacrificed themselves to it. And so there, you know, there's that aspect of it. And what else? With this particular piece, I was trying to marry the wire work that I'm doing now. I have a whole body of work that I'm working on that revolves around these wire sculptures, which isn't represented here, but I wanted to marry that material and the ideas behind that, which has a lot to do with the cosmos, with painting. And so this is really my first attempt at being very purposeful about that, in terms of the ideas behind it, not just, you know, mixing and matching materials, but the actual conceptual ideas behind it with paint. Some of these pieces here, the two on the left are older works, but they all are, you know, this one in particular is kind of, what am I gonna say, autobiographical, but again, it deals with the past, the present, and the future. And, you know, reverence for the ancestors, and trying to create a space where I have access to their wisdom and their energy. So a lot of what I do when I'm working is that, you know, I feel like I'm conjuring up a certain type of energy from, you know, from specific sources that will then, what I want to say, they, for the viewer, I think that the viewer can experience that in a way that it provokes thought. You know, you look at it, and there's something there that the viewer can relate to, whether they understand it or not, but there's some point of access where it just provokes thought. You know, I think art has the capacity and the power to really elevate consciousness. And so that's part of what I hope happens for viewers when they look at, you know, when they look at my work, that they, you know, that it provokes their curiosity, that they're touched in some kind of way to, you know, to either provoke curiosity. It may evoke some emotions. It may evoke memory. A lot of my work is about memory, you know, about cultural memory. And so that's what goes into, that's what goes into my work. You know, a lot of times I'll have an idea about, okay, I'm going to do this, and I'll set out and I'll try to be, you know, start out trying to be precise. I forgot who it was earlier who said, well, why can't I just paint an apple, you know? But so sometimes I'll start out thinking, okay, I'm going to do this. It's going to be something very, you know, specific and representational or very clean, but it just, you know, it never ends up that way. It takes on its own life. This piece that we're looking at now, I call Studio Grigri, and it's, I guess I call it a perennial piece because it depicts artists who came before me, who were very inspirational to me, and as well as Harriet Tubman and some other freedom fighters. But it just fuels my impulse to work. And as these folks who are depicted in here have passed on, this is like my sort of a studio shrine to honor them. And so I continually add people to it. And there's actually someone there who's covered up. When I started this piece, I really wasn't thinking of it so much as a shrine to those who have departed. I was really just, putting up images of people and, who were important to me. And then I was invited to be in a show, was actually Day of the Dead. And I thought, well, this piece is kind of perfect for that. But there was somebody on it who is still very much alive. So I've actually covered her. I guess, I've covered her up because I really didn't feel like I wanted to put that juju out there that,
Right.
So she's covered up, but she's covered up on this piece. But this is something that I actually keep it in my studio, and it brings me energy, and it has a lot of those same marks that I was talking about, dots and lines that as I'm making them, I just get into a zone with it. I have certain music that I listen to that kind of helps me free up my process, because I do tend to get too much into my head, and it takes a while for me to just throw that stuff away and then just do it, just be one with the work, or let it flow and do what it's going to do. So
as Habib would say, to get everybody else out of the room, right?
Yeah, you gotta clear space to make, let the art do what it do. Yeah.
Well, and I love that, that it's in a place, and, definitely in a direct conversation with Anne and Virginia, as well as other artists in the exhibition, of that it shows as well as tells, right? So it has this story, but it's not depictions of the objects, it's the objects that, as we all know, found objects are invested with the energy of everyone to whom they ever belonged. And so you have, when you said Day of the Dead, or this idea of an altar, like those kinds of objects or seeds or things, old photographs, would not be at all out of place in an altar piece. And yet to subsume that into the language of your painting, I think is really powerful. And I'm particularly obsessed with the idea that every time you show it, it'll be different than it was the last time you showed it, forever, because you continue to add to it. And I feel like that is really special and absolutely worth highlighting as well. And I love the idea that there's things in there that kind of like play themselves, right? Like,
right.
It's not it's a baobab seed in a symbolic sense, but also in a very specific sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I love that interplay as well, and what you were saying about, past, present, and future kind of collapsing in that way. And an acknowledgement that there is an ancestral universe that you have access to if you want it, and that it can be very present and very much alive if you want that for yourself. And I find that incredibly moving on a personal level, and also incredibly salient to the conversation that we've had today about the different aspects of being human.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That is one thing actually that I love about this show, is that the work is so very different and diverse, yet we all have a lot in common in terms of, time, the temporality of it, and just the various metaphysical aspects. And I think that's really, for me, that's what the beauty of art is, that it is a universal language. And so you can communicate a lot to people visually because it's sensory. It's not, you're not constrained by the interpretation of words. It's it's sensory driven, and so it can speak to everybody pretty much in some way.
That is beautiful. Oh my God. Wow. I'm really moved. Thank you so much. Okay, so I just want to acknowledge, and I want to make sure I'm correct, that Jason was not able to join us today. I did not want him to feel skipped, but I will just say that I'm really glad that Jason's work is in the show, because to me, the depictions of, this, like, that to me is like planting a flag and staking a claim for like the ways in which like classical Western art history has addressed some of the topics of today, right? And I feel like it's extraordinary to have that perspective represented as well. And I'm sad he wasn't here, but I really appreciate the work and its presence in this pantheon. And then our final artist of today will be Takeshi. And I guess at this point, it's sort of like, say whatever you want, but I am, specifically interested in, well, really, honestly, you're the one that's had a chance to listen to the entire conversation. So what I am going to do is ask you, if you wouldn't mind, to take on the role of sort of telling us about your work, the collaboration, and sort of like, if there's anything that you feel like your work has to say that is not something we've spoken about yet today, as our final artist, I would love to give you the chance to speak to that as well, really, whatever you like.
Okay, thank you, Shana, and thank you for having me and having my collaborator, May, in this show. Thank you, Khan, and thank you, Humiko-san, and thank you for other artists who participated in this exhibition. So my work is, let's say, performance, and I think what artists should do in this divided nation is kind of visualize our message or visualize our voice to the community to make a better society. So the artist only can do to visualize. So even my performance is just moving and action, not painting, sculpture, those kind of objects, but also the movement and sounds that visualize a message to the audience members. So I want to explain kind of my background first. And I was born and raised in Japan, and I came here when I was kind of young. And since then, I was searching my identity, like a Japanese, Asian, Eastern identity, or Western American identity. So, those kind of two different opposite identity kind of makes me nerve and makes me something stress. So one time I kind of follow the Western dominant culture, but sometimes I feel, I should show my identity. So I tried kind of different ways, Western way and Eastern ways, but none of those worked. So I kind of stopped showing like a me personality. So to call the Western culture, I'm saying, I don't want to say so bad. So then I found the performance is one of the way how I can express myself and to show some opportunities to the cultures, to this society. Like this, COVID-19 pandemic society, we're so different and so divided. Beforehand, we can interact, we can meet people, but now it's just, we can kind of back up and we can do anything like this. Zoom meeting is kind of shift to digital world. The same as my performance, I almost always to interact with the people, like audience members, other artists. But this time I couldn't interact with audience members. So I captured our performance in a digital way, but this also can communicate to interact other people. So, we can't stop and we can't deny this pandemic, but artists, we can move forward with our artistic action. So back to my performance, and I always collaborate with other artists or audience members. And that gives me flexibility and also acceptance. So we need flexibility and acceptance in this community to make a better life. So I don't want to offer or show kind of egotistic identity, but I want to show kind of generous offer with the narrative performance or movement to tell viewers and audience members to think what they can do. So like my collaborator May, we have collaborated, we made collaborative performance since she was 9. She's 17 now, but since she was 9, I totally trust her. And trust is another keyword for this society. We need to trust each other. So while this improvised performance, I totally trust her. And I can do this and show my ability. And also I trust her what she can provide. So, those kind of improvised and interactive performance that I'm thinking, that's my ability to show this community to make a better society. So
I'm literally almost a little bit emotional when you point out the level of trust that goes into a collaboration, and then just extrapolating that to this entire exhibition and to this entire realm of thought about our relationship to ourselves and the planet. That is so powerful, and the way that what we're looking at and what you're talking about embodies that trust of that dependency on one another. Yes. Is so moving.
Thank
Truly. You. I'm almost a little bit like shook. Like I'm almost like, okay, you guys wrap it up. I need to think about trust some more. But that is so powerful, truly. And I feel like kind of the perfect way to finish thinking about this incredible conversation. Wow, you guys, by the way, you guys are an incredible group of artists. The show is beautiful. Kong, what an incredible job. And again, I really am almost frightened by how timely it is to this literal day and moment, considering how long it took to put together, and how the work spans a longer time, and that has been really inspirational as well. Wow, that was a lot, but I feel like it was kind of all one big idea, which I guess is the mark of a truly perfect curation. I think when you can have so much and yet keep it so central. Well done. I am going to let Kong have the last word. Noriko, if you guys want to say anything, and if anybody wants to say anything, I'm not going to be the one to stop you, but we're already over time, so I'm not going to make you either. But I just want to thank you again. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you most especially to the artists. Each of you are doing really incredible work, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Shana. You were great. Kong, would you like to say something before we close?
Oh, I just want to thank everyone for being here, and also Kyo couldn't be here tonight because he's currently in Japan. So
Right.
Enrico, if you would like to close the event.
Sure. I mean, unfortunately, we have to end this talk. It was just so interesting, and we always have so much to talk about. And thank you, everyone, and the artists for sharing your work. And it's always fascinating to hear your creative process. As Adrian said, it really elevates our consciousness. Thank you, Shana, again, for your stimulating discussion and for your thoughtful and insightful questions. And thank you, Kong, for this beautiful exhibition. And thank you, everyone, for participating in this talk. Goodbye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
And
Good night,
hope to
everyone.
see you all soon. Hope we can get together soon, and please come and see the
We'll
exhibition.
just all follow each other on Instagram and wait until we can have hugs. But I appreciate you again. Thank you so much.
But meanwhile, this was terrific. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a good night,
you.
everyone.
Take care.
Yeah, good night.
Good
Thank
night.
you.